What would you do if you saved the life of the most dangerous man in New York? Would you run? Would you hide? Would you pretend it never happened and pray he forgets your face? That's what any smart woman would do. Unfortunately, Kira Ashford had never been accused of being the kind of smart that kept her out of trouble. The kind of smart that whispered run when every instinct screamed stay. The kind of smart that made life easier instead of more interesting. No, Kira had the other kind of intelligence, the dangerous kind. The kind that had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments, 4 years of private security work, and more close calls than she cared to count. The kind that was about to change her life forever. It started, as most complicated stories do, on an otherwise ordinary evening. November in New York had arrived with its typical brutal efficiency, stripping the last leaves from the trees and replacing autumn's golden light with the gray promise of winter. The city had transformed into something harder, sharper, the kind of cold that cut through expensive wool coats and reminded everyone that Manhattan's glamour was just a thin veneer over concrete and steel. Kira Ashford had grown up in Atlanta, where November meant cool evenings and the last vestiges of fall color clinging to the trees. Moving to New York 6 years ago had required an adjustment period she still wasn't sure she'd completed. The cold here was different, meaner, and it seemed to seep into bones and stay there until spring finally remembered to arrive. But she hadn't moved here for the weather. She'd moved here because New York was where the work was, where the money was, where people with enough wealth and enough enemies needed people like her to keep them breathing. Tonight she was working a private event at the Obsidian, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where the cheapest bottle of wine cost more than her monthly car payment, and the clientele measured their net worth in buildings rather than bank accounts. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a building in Tribeca, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city that cost more than some countries' gross domestic product to enjoy. She wasn't there as a guest. At 31 years old, Kira had learned to be comfortable in spaces where she would never belong as anything other than hired help. It was a skill that had taken years to develop, the ability to move through worlds of extreme privilege without feeling diminished by her position in them. Her mother had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in Buckhead for 23 years, and Kira had grown up understanding that there were 2 Americas, one where people like her family served, and one where people were served. The military had been her escape from that binary. 8 years in the Army, rising to the rank of Sergeant First Class, had given her a different kind of identity. In the military, you were judged by competence, by courage, by your ability to perform under pressure. Your family's bank account didn't matter. Your childhood zip code was irrelevant. What mattered was whether you could do the job. She had done the job. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, assignments that had taken her into situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. She'd earned her stripes the hard way, through sand and blood and the kind of experiences that never quite left you, even when you tried to move on. The transition to private security had been natural. Ashford's security consulting had started as a one-woman operation 5 years ago, Kira taking small jobs for executives who needed personal protection during contentious business deals. Word had spread, as it always did when someone was genuinely good at their work. Now she employed a team of 12, handled contracts worth millions of dollars annually, and had a reputation for discretion and effectiveness that made her services highly sought after. Tonight she was providing security for Harrison Wells, a technology CEO whose recent testimony against a corporate rival had earned him some concerning attention from people who preferred to settle disputes outside of courtrooms. Wells was harmless enough. Nervous, soft around the middle, the type of man who had made his fortune behind a computer screen and seemed genuinely bewildered that his business decisions could have real-world consequences. He'd hired Kira's firm, Ashford Security Consulting, after receiving 3 separate death threats in the span of 2 weeks. The police had been sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful, which was where Kira came in. She'd positioned herself at a small table near the private dining room Wells had reserved, close enough to monitor his dinner with potential investors, but far enough to avoid making the conversation awkward. Her tailored black suit jacket concealed the Glock 19 at her hip, and the small earpiece hidden beneath her dark curls connected her to the 2-man team she'd stationed at the restaurant's entrances. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her cover story suggested, a successful young professional enjoying a quiet dinner alone. Her tablet displayed financial reports she had no intention of reading, and the glass of sparkling water beside her plate gave her something to do with her hands. In reality, Kira was doing what she did best, watching everything. 8 years in the military had trained her to see what others missed. 4 years of private security had refined that training into something approaching instinct. She cataloged exits, counted staff, noted the positioning of every guest in her sightline. She watched the rhythm of the restaurant, learning its patterns so she would immediately recognize when something disrupted them. The staff moved with the choreographed precision of people who had been trained to anticipate needs before they were expressed. Waiters glided between tables, refilling glasses and removing plates with the kind of silent efficiency that made excellent service invisible. The sommelier made his rounds, offering wine recommendations with the confidence of someone who had spent decades studying his craft. In the kitchen, visible through a large window designed to showcase the culinary theater, chefs worked in coordinated bursts of activity. Kira noted all of it, building a mental model of what normal looked like in this space, so she would recognize abnormal when it appeared. She had been trained by some of the best in the business. Her supervisor during her first tour in Afghanistan had been a former Secret Service agent who'd spent 20 years protecting presidents before burning out and seeking a slower pace in military intelligence. He had taught her the fundamentals of protective observation, the way to watch a room without appearing to watch, the art of seeming distracted while remaining hyper-alert. Later, after leaving the military, she had sought out additional training. Close protection courses in Israel, tactical driving programs in Virginia, threat assessment seminars taught by former FBI profilers. She had invested tens of thousands of dollars and thousands of hours into becoming exceptional at something most people never thought about. The result was the ability to sit alone at a restaurant table, appearing to be nothing more than a professional woman enjoying a quiet dinner, while simultaneously tracking every potential threat in a 50-foot radius. Which is exactly what happened at 947. The main dining room of the Obsidian was arranged around a central space, with private alcoves branching off like spokes from a wheel. The most prestigious of these alcoves sat at the back of the restaurant, partially hidden behind a carved wooden screen that offered privacy while still allowing its occupants to observe the room. That alcove had been occupied since before Kira arrived by a party of 4 men who radiated the particular kind of quiet authority that came from actually having power rather than merely pretending to it. She had noticed them immediately, of course. It was impossible not to. The oldest of the 4 sat with his back to the wall, a position that spoke of someone who had learned through experience never to leave himself exposed. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, silver threading through dark hair that was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so carefully composed. He wore his expensive suit like armor, and his companions deferred to him with the unconscious ease of men who had spent their lives following his lead. Kira had made him as trouble within 30 seconds of her arrival. Not because he looked dangerous, though he certainly did, but because she recognized the particular ecosystem that surrounded him, the way the restaurant staff treated his table with just slightly more attention than the others, the way the other diners seemed to unconsciously avoid looking in his direction for too long, the way 2 additional men sat at a separate table nearby, their attention never straying from the alcove they were clearly assigned to protect. She didn't know who he was. Didn't need to. She knew what he was, and that was enough to keep her attention partially fixed on that corner of the room, even as she maintained surveillance on her own client. At 9:47, one of the men at the alcove stood, excusing himself with a gesture toward the restrooms. He was younger than the others, maybe late 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that Kira associated with people who hadn't yet learned to control their tells. He moved through the restaurant with studied casualness, but his eyes kept darting toward the alcove he'd just left. Kira's instincts prickled. She tracked him as he passed her table, noting the slight bulge beneath his jacket that suggested a weapon, the faint sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the restaurant's cool temperature, the way his right hand kept twitching toward his pocket. He wasn't going to the restroom. Kira was moving before she consciously decided to act. She rose from her table smoothly, leaving enough money to cover her untouched dinner, and followed the young man at a careful distance. Her earpiece crackled as she murmured a quiet update to her team. Possible situation developing. Maintain position with the client. I'm investigating. The young man pushed through the door marked Staff Only, disappearing into the service corridor that ran behind the main dining room. Kira followed, her hand drifting to rest on her hip, close enough to her weapon to draw in under a second if necessary. The service corridor was narrow and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the restaurant's public spaces. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated white walls and linoleum floors, and the air carried the mingled scents of cooking food and industrial cleaning supplies. Kira moved silently, her years of training allowing her to navigate the space without making a sound. She found the young man standing at a junction where the corridor split, one path leading to the kitchen and another to a secondary entrance used for deliveries and staff access. He was speaking urgently into a phone, his voice low but carrying in the empty hallway. Now. He's in position. The security detail won't see it coming. We move on my signal. Kira's blood went cold. She processed the implications in the space between heartbeats. The young man had been sitting with the powerful figure in the alcove. He was now coordinating what sounded very much like an attack, which meant one of two things. Either he was setting up an assassination attempt on someone else, or he was betraying the man he'd been dining with. Given the nervous energy she'd observed, the sweating, the twitching, she was betting on the latter. In her years of military service, Kira had learned that there were two types of people in crisis situations. The first type froze, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening, paralyzed by the weight of possible consequences. The second type acted, drawing on training and instinct to move forward even when the path was unclear. Kira had always been the second type. She had perhaps seconds to make a decision. This wasn't her client. This wasn't her job. The smart thing to do would be to return to her table, complete her assignment, and pretend she'd never heard anything. Whatever was about to happen in that private alcove was none of her business. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, something she'd said when Kira was 12 and had gotten into a fight defending a smaller kid from bullies. You can't save everyone, baby. You'll break your heart trying. But Kira had never learned to listen to that particular piece of advice. She had broken her heart a dozen times over, intervening in situations that weren't her problem, defending people who weren't her responsibility. It was a character flaw, perhaps. Or maybe it was the only thing about herself she truly liked. She moved. The young man never saw her coming. One moment he was giving his final instructions into the phone, and the next, Kira's hand was clamped over his mouth, while her other arm locked around his throat in a chokehold designed to render him unconscious without causing permanent damage. He struggled, of course. They always did. His arms flailed, trying to reach behind him to grab at her face or hair. His body twisted, attempting to throw her off balance. His feet scrambled against the linoleum floor, seeking purchase that would let him reverse their positions. But Kira had been subduing men larger than herself since her first week of basic training, and this one was soft beneath his expensive suit, more accustomed to boardrooms than actual physical confrontation. He might have been able to order someone killed, but he clearly had never done the killing himself. Within 8 seconds, his struggles weakened. By 12, he was unconscious, sliding down the wall as Kira eased her grip. She retrieved his phone, scanning the recent calls and messages. What she found confirmed her suspicions and raised the stakes considerably higher. The powerful man in the alcove was named Nico Benedetti. According to the messages on this phone, he was the head of the Benedetti crime family, one of the most influential and dangerous organizations on the East Coast. And according to the detailed plan outlined in the text thread, his nephew Marco, the young man now unconscious at Kira's feet, had arranged to have him killed in the next 3 minutes. The attack would come through the service entrance. 4 men, professionals, paid $500,000 for the job. They would move through the kitchen, disguised as delivery personnel, and open fire on the alcove before the security detail could respond. Marco would survive because he would conveniently be in the restroom when the shooting started. He would inherit his uncle's position and the empire that came with it. It was clean. It was well planned, and it was about to fail. Kira was already moving again, racing back toward the main dining room while simultaneously speaking into her earpiece. Team 2, I need you at the service entrance north side immediately. Armed hostiles incoming, at least 4. Detain them if possible, lethal force authorized if necessary. Copy that. Her man's voice was calm and professional. What about the client? I'll handle it. Go. She burst through the staff-only door and into the dining room with enough speed to turn heads. She didn't care. She was already calculating angles and trajectories, already scanning for the security details she'd noticed earlier, already planning how to move an entire table of dangerous men without getting herself killed in the process. The security detail spotted her first. Both men rose from their table, hands moving toward weapons, faces hardening with professional suspicion at this unknown woman bearing down on their boss's location. Kira raised her hands, showing them empty, and kept her voice low and urgent as she approached. Your man, Marco, just sold you out. Armed team coming through the service entrance in approximately 90 seconds. You need to move your principal now. The security men exchanged glances. The taller one stepped forward, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who just took down your traitor and is trying to save your boss's life. You can verify my story, or you can stand here asking questions while professionals walk through that kitchen and open fire. Your choice." Something in her tone must have convinced them, or perhaps they'd noticed Marco's extended absence and drawn their own conclusions. The taller one nodded sharply and moved toward the alcove, while his partner positioned himself to cover the kitchen entrance. Kira followed, her heart pounding with the particular adrenaline that came from moving toward danger instead of away from it. She'd felt this before, in Kandahar and Mosul, in a dozen close protection details that had gone sideways. The fear was there, as it always was, but it was buried beneath layers of training and experience that transformed terror into focus. The carved wooden screen offered little actual protection, but the men in the alcove hadn't needed physical barriers. Their protection had been reputation, fear, the understanding that attacking Nico Benedetti meant war. None of that would stop bullets. The boss himself looked up as his security man approached, gray eyes sharpening with immediate awareness that something was wrong. He was handsome, Kira noted distantly, in that dangerous way that some powerful men managed. Not soft or polished like the corporate executives she usually protected. This was a man who had fought for what he had and would fight to keep it. "We need to move you, sir." "Now." The security man kept his voice low, professional. Credible threat incoming through the service corridor. To his credit, Nico Benedetti didn't argue. He didn't demand explanations or waste precious seconds on questions. He simply rose from his seat with fluid grace and allowed his security detail to flank him. But his eyes found Kira's, and something electric passed between them. "You," he said. His voice was deep, accented with Italian rhythms that smoothed the edges of his English. "You discovered this?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was there. Because I saw the signs. Because walking away isn't something I'm very good at." A ghost of something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Then the moment shattered as the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere behind the kitchen doors. Kira was moving before the echoes faded. She drew her Glock in one smooth motion, placing herself between the sound of chaos and the man she'd just risked everything to protect. "Secondary exit," she commanded, her voice cutting through the screams that had begun to fill the restaurant. "Now." The security detail didn't question her. There wasn't time. They formed a protective diamond around their boss and moved, Kira taking point, her weapon up and her focus narrowed to the deadly corridor of space between them and safety. The secondary exit led through a service hallway and out into an alley that opened onto a side street. Kira swept each corner before they turned it, her training taking over completely, reducing the world to targets and obstacles, threats and cover. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, the kind of space that appeared in crime statistics and police reports. Trash bins lined one wall, and the smell of cooking oil and rotting produce hung in the cold air. Perfect ambush territory, Kira noted automatically. Too many hiding spots, limited sight lines, multiple potential positions for a secondary team. She moved faster, her senses straining to detect any threat before it materialized. More gunfire behind them, closer now. Her team was engaging the attackers, buying time. Kira heard her earpiece crackle with updates. 2 hostiles down, 2 still active, kitchen staff evacuating, NYPD en route. Good. The cavalry was coming. They just had to survive long enough for it to arrive. They burst into the alley, cold November air hitting Kira's face like a slap. The temperature had dropped since she'd entered the restaurant, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid darkness. A black SUV idled at the curb, engine running, and the security detail hustled their boss toward it with practiced efficiency. Kira hung back, covering their retreat, her weapon trained on the door they'd just exited. She expected pursuit, prepared for it. In her experience, assassination attempts rarely came with a single contingency. Professional killers always had backup plans, secondary teams ready to engage if the primary assault failed. The seconds stretched into eternities as she waited, every nerve ending on high alert, but no one followed. Either her team had eliminated the remaining hostiles, or the attackers had decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Either way, the immediate threat appeared to have passed. Get in. The command came from behind her. Kira turned to find Nico Benedetti standing at the open door of the SUV, his security detail already inside, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He shouldn't have been standing there. Any competent principal would have been inside the vehicle by now, letting his security team handle the extraction. But this man was standing in the open, exposed, waiting for her. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Kira couldn't decide which. I have a client to check on. Your client is fine. My people have confirmed it. You saved my life tonight. The least I can do is ensure you survive the next few hours. There was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't a request. Something that spoke of a man accustomed to being obeyed, who had built an empire on the foundation of that expectation. Kira should have refused. Should have walked away, completed her contracted assignment, and pretended this night had never happened. But the adrenaline was still singing through her veins, and she knew, with the instinct that had kept her alive through a decade of dangerous work, that refusing this man right now would be more dangerous than getting in his car. She lowered her weapon and climbed into the SUV. The door closed behind her, sealing out the chaos of the night, and for the first time in 8 years of military and security work, Kira Ashford found herself in a situation she hadn't planned for. The interior of the SUV was luxurious and dark, all black leather and tinted windows that turned the city outside into a blur of lights. The seats were heated, Kira realized, as warmth seeped into her from below, a small luxury that seemed almost absurdly decadent given what had just happened. Nico Benedetti sat across from her, his composure remarkably intact for a man who had just survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by his own nephew. 2 other men shared the vehicle, the security detail members who had helped execute the extraction. They sat with their weapons still drawn, eyes scanning the streets outside with professional vigilance. Neither spoke, but their tension was palpable, the coiled energy of people who knew the night wasn't over yet. Your name, Nico said. It wasn't a question. Kira Ashford. I run Ashford Security Consulting. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected, the bodyguard who saved my life. His eyes swept over her, cataloging details with the same analytical precision she'd used on him earlier. Military training, special operations if I had. To guess. What branch? Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. She kept her voice level, professional. 8th Second Combat Tours, 2 years intelligence work stateside after that. What unit? That's classified. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Fair enough. And now you protect software executives from angry business rivals. Tonight I did. Tomorrow might be different. He studied her for a long moment, and Kira felt herself being assessed in a way she'd rarely experienced. Most people looked at her and saw a black woman in a well-tailored suit, made assumptions about who she was and what she could do based on the color of her skin and the curves of her body. This man looked deeper. He saw the predator beneath the professional exterior, recognized the danger in her the same way she recognized it in him. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first real expression she'd seen on his face since the chaos began. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Ashford. Do you know who I am? What I am? I know enough. The Benedetti family has controlled a significant portion of organized crime on the East Coast for 3 generations. Your father expanded into legitimate businesses in the 90s, or real estate and restaurants primarily. You took over 12 years ago when he retired. You're known for being strategic rather than violent, preferring negotiation to bloodshed when possible. But when violence becomes necessary, you don't hesitate. His eyebrows rose slightly. You've done your homework. I do my homework on everyone who might become relevant to my clients. You own 4 restaurants in Manhattan, including the Obsidian. When I took the Wells contract, I researched the venue and its ownership. Your name came up. And yet you still intervened tonight, even knowing what I am? Kira met his eyes steadily. What you are didn't factor into my decision. A man was about to be murdered. I had the ability to stop it. What he does for a living wasn't relevant in that moment. The concept seemed to genuinely puzzle him. He studied her for a long moment, and Kira had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, measured, weighed against criteria she couldn't see. The right thing, he repeated slowly. In my experience, people don't risk their lives for the right thing. They do it for money or power or revenge, sometimes for love. But simple righteousness? That's rare enough to be suspicious. Then I guess I'm suspicious. Another flicker of that almost smile. Yes. I suppose you are. The SUV moved through Manhattan streets with the confident speed of a vehicle that didn't worry about traffic laws. Through the tinted windows, Kira watched the city blur past, familiar landmarks rendered strange by the surreal quality of the evening. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Somewhere safe. I need time to assess the situation, determine how deep my nephew's betrayal runs. Until I know who I can trust, I'm taking no chances. And I'm part of that somehow? You're the only person tonight who I know with certainty isn't trying to kill me. In my current circumstances, that makes you invaluable." There was logic there, Kira had to admit. Twisted logic, perhaps, but logic nonetheless. She had proven herself an ally in the most dramatic way possible. Whatever else Nico Benedetti suspected about the people around him, he had no reason to doubt her. "I have a life," she said carefully. "Clients, responsibilities. I can't just disappear into your world because you've decided I'm useful. Your life is about to become considerably more complicated regardless of what you decide tonight." He leaned forward slightly, and in the dim light of the SUV's interior, she could see the steel beneath his civilized surface. "Do you understand what you've done? You've made yourself known to my enemies. The men who tried to kill me tonight, whoever hired them, they'll know your face, your name, your business. By saving my life, you've painted a target on your own." The words hit like cold water. Kira had considered the immediate risks of her intervention, but hadn't fully processed the long-term implications. In her world, threats ended when the immediate danger passed. In his world, apparently, they were just beginning. "You're trying to scare me into accepting your protection. I'm trying to make you understand reality." His voice softened slightly, losing some of its commanding edge. "I'm not in the habit of forcing women to do anything, but I am in the habit of protecting people who have earned it. You saved my life tonight, Miss Ashford. Whether you like it or not, that means something to me." The SUV slowed, turning into an underground parking garage beneath a building that Kira didn't recognize. They descended 3 levels before stopping beside an elevator guarded by 2 men who looked like they could handle anything short of a tank assault. "Stay with me tonight," Nico said as the door opened. "Let me get the intelligence on what we're dealing with. Tomorrow, when we both understand the situation better, you can make an informed decision about what happens next." It was reasonable. More reasonable than she'd expected from a man in his position. Kira found herself nodding despite her reservations. "One night. But I want contact with my team to make sure my client is handled." "Of course." He stepped out of the vehicle and offered her his hand with the old-fashioned courtesy of someone raised in a different world. "Whatever you need." Kira took his hand, felt the warmth of his palm against hers, and allowed herself to be helped out of the SUV. She had no way of knowing that this single night would stretch into weeks, that the target painted on her back would become a weight she couldn't shed, that the man whose hand she held would become something she'd never expected. But that's how the complicated stories always go. One night becomes 2. 2 becomes a week. And before you know it, you're in so deep that the surface is just a memory. The safe house was a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, the kind of space that appeared in architecture magazines and real estate fantasies. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city's dark heart, and the interior was decorated with the spare elegance of someone who had enough wealth to afford simplicity. $20 million, Kira estimated, looking around at the understated luxury. Maybe more. The art on the walls alone was probably worth enough to fund her company for a decade. A Basquiat hung in the living room, and unless she was mistaken, that was a genuine Kehinde Wiley in the hallway. The furniture was modern Italian, clean lines and expensive materials combined with surprising comfort. A kitchen that looked like it had been designed by a Michelin-starred chef gleamed with stainless steel and marble. The floors were heated hardwood, warm beneath her feet even through her shoes. It was the kind of place that reminded Kira how far she was from her roots. Her mother still lived in the same 3-bedroom house in southwest Atlanta where Kira had grown up, a house that could have fit into this apartment's living room with space to spare. Kira made her calls while Nico retreated to what was apparently his office, the door closing behind him with the finality of a man who had difficult conversations ahead. Her team confirmed that Harrison Wells had been safely evacuated and was now at his home with additional security. The 2 remaining members of her team were handling the police interviews, providing statements that carefully omitted anything related to the Benedetti family. The attackers at the restaurant had been neutralized, 2 dead and 2 in custody, though Kira suspected that those in custody wouldn't survive long enough to provide useful intelligence. Men who tried to kill someone like Nico Benedetti didn't tend to have long life expectancies in police custody. She didn't ask about Marco, didn't want to know. The guest room she was shown to was larger than her entire apartment, with a bed that could have slept 4 and an ensuite bathroom featuring a soaking tub that probably cost more than her car. Marble floors, heated towel racks, a shower with more jets than she could count. The closet contained a selection of women's clothing in various sizes, tags still attached, as if someone had anticipated that female guests might need wardrobe options. Kira ignored all of it, standing instead at the window, watching the city lights and trying to process how spectacularly her life had just become complicated. Central Park spread out below her, a dark rectangle in the midst of the city's glittering grid. The trees had lost most of their leaves, but the paths still glowed with lamplights, and she could see the occasional late-night jogger or dog walker braving the cold. Normal people, living normal lives, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the towers. Above them. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Nico Benedetti stood in the hallway, his suit jacket removed and his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of actual physical labor rather than gym memberships. The civilized mask he'd worn at the restaurant had slipped slightly, revealing the tiredness beneath. Whatever conversations he'd been having had taken their toll. Up close, in the softer light of the penthouse hallway, Kira could see details she'd missed before. A small scar near his left eyebrow, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The beginning of gray at his temples, distinguished rather than aging. The kind of bone structure that would have made him handsome at any age, but was particularly striking in his mid-40s, when experience had carved character into features that might have been merely pretty in youth. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "and to apologize for essentially kidnapping you. It's not kidnapping if I came willingly. A semantic distinction that I'm sure would comfort the authorities." He gestured toward the living room. "Would you join me for a drink? I find that attempting sleep after assassination attempts is generally futile. How many have there been, including tonight?" He paused, seeming to genuinely count. 7. Though this is the first time someone I trusted was involved. They sat on opposite ends of a leather sofa that probably cost more than Kira made in a month, crystal glasses of whiskey in hand. The lights were dim, casting the room in shades of amber and shadow. Through the windows, the city sparkled and hummed, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding within its towers. The whiskey was exceptional, smoky and smooth, the kind of aged single malt that cost hundreds of dollars per bottle. Kira savored it, letting the warmth spread through her chest, knowing she shouldn't get too comfortable but finding it difficult to maintain her professional guard. The silence between them was strangely comfortable, the quiet of two people who had been through something intense and were still processing it. Kira had experienced this before, the peculiar intimacy that developed between people who had shared danger. It was why so many military romances bloomed and burned, why soldiers sometimes made the mistake of confusing adrenaline and proximity with genuine connection. She reminded herself to be careful. "My nephew," Nico finally said, his eyes fixed on some middle distance Kira couldn't see. His voice carried the weight of a grief she suspected he would never fully express. "I raised him after his father. My brother died. Marco was 7 years old when Johnny was killed, shot in front of his house by a rival family we've long since absorbed. I took that boy into my home, gave him everything I had, educated him at the best schools, trusted him with things I trusted no one else with." His hand tightened around his glass, and all along, for years apparently, he was planning to take everything from me, gathering allies, making promises, building the coalition that tried to kill me tonight. The boy I raised, the boy I loved like my own son. "Betrayal is always worse from family," Kira said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, and Kira felt the full weight of his attention like a physical pressure. There was no artifice in his gaze now, no calculation or assessment, just raw pain that he was allowing her to see. "You speak from experience." "My father." Kira took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn give her courage to say things she rarely spoke aloud. "He was military, too. Career Army, 22 years, respected, decorated. The kind of officer people looked up to, the kind of man I wanted to be when I was growing up. He used to tell me stories about honor and duty, about what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself." She paused, the old wound still tender despite the years. And he was stealing from his unit's operational fund for years before anyone caught on. When they finally court-martialed him, he blamed everyone but himself, including me, for not being loyal enough to cover for him, for not lying under oath when they asked what I knew. What happened to him? Prison. Fort Leavenworth. He's been out for 3 years now, but we don't speak. Haven't since the trial. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me an important lesson about who to trust. She met his eyes steadily, The answer is almost no one. And yet you trusted your instincts enough tonight to save a stranger? He set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. Why? Truly. I need to understand. Kira considered the question seriously. She could have given him the easy answer, the noble answer, something about duty and honor and doing the right thing, but something about this man, this moment, demanded honesty. Because I'm tired of watching people get hurt when I could stop it, she said finally, because I've seen enough death to know what it looks like when it's coming, and I couldn't just stand there and let it happen. Because maybe I wanted to prove to myself that all the training, all the violence I've learned, could be used for something other than following orders. That's a complicated answer. I'm a complicated person? Yes. His voice dropped lower, taking on an intimate quality that made Kira's pulse quicken despite herself. I'm beginning to see that. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Kira didn't want to name. She'd felt attraction before, had even acted on it occasionally, but this was different. This was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with bullets and betrayal. I should sleep, she said, breaking the tension before it could build into something unmanageable. And you should too. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. Tomorrow? Nico agreed, but he didn't move. Tomorrow I begin hunting the people who tried to kill me. I need to know who else was involved, who funded this, who thought they could. Take what's mine. And what happens to them when you find them? His eyes went cold, the civilized mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath. They learn why no one crosses the Benedetti family. Kira should have been horrified, should have felt the moral revulsion that any decent person would experience at the casual mention of violence. Instead, she felt a dark understanding, a recognition of something she'd buried beneath layers of training and professionalism. She'd killed people. She knew what it felt like to pull a trigger and watch life leave someone's eyes. The military had taught her to call it necessary, to frame it as duty, but the truth was simpler and uglier. Some people only understood violence. Some threats could only be eliminated permanently. Good night, Mr. Benedetti, she said, rising from the sofa. Nico. His voice stopped her at the threshold of the hallway. If we're going to spend the foreseeable future in each other's company, you should call me Nico. Good night, Nico. Good night, Kira. Her name in his mouth sounded like something precious, something claimed. She didn't sleep well that night. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of security briefings, intelligence reports, and the gradual revelation of just how deep the conspiracy against Nico Benedetti ran. Marco, it turned out, had not acted alone. He'd been the front man for a coalition of ambitious underbosses who had decided that the Benedetti family's traditional approach to business was too conservative for the modern age. They wanted expansion. They wanted aggression. They wanted to push into territories that Nico had deliberately avoided, drug trafficking and human smuggling, and the kinds of operations that brought federal attention. Marco had convinced them that under his leadership, the Benedetti family would enter a new era of profitability and power. The intelligence came in through channels Kira had never encountered before. Men with hard eyes and harder hands appeared at the penthouse at all hours, delivering reports in Italian that Nico translated for her benefit. Phone calls came from numbers that changed daily. Encrypted messages arrived on devices that were destroyed after each use. Kira learned more about organized crime in those 3 days than she'd learned in her entire career of working adjacent to it. She learned about territories and alliances, about the complex web of legitimate businesses that laundered money, and the intricate protocols that governed interactions between families. She learned about the commission that nominally governed disputes between the major organizations, about the unwritten rules that separated acceptable violence from the kind that brought unwanted attention. She learned that Nico Benedetti was both more powerful and more restrained than she'd expected, a man who preferred negotiation to violence but was absolutely capable of the latter when necessary. His reputation had been built on strategic brilliance rather than brutality, on the ability to see 3 moves ahead and position himself to win without firing a shot. But when firing shots became necessary, he did not hesitate. 3 of Marco's co-conspirators were dead within 48 hours of the failed assassination. The others had fled, scattering to whatever protection they thought they could find with rival families. Nico's people were hunting them with the patient efficiency of predators who knew their prey couldn't run forever. She also learned that leaving his protection was going to be more difficult than she'd anticipated. The intelligence confirmed what Nico had warned her about that first night. Her intervention at the restaurant had been noted. Her name had been passed along channels that preferred to operate in shadows. 2 separate sources reported that a price had been placed on her head, Insurance against the possibility that she knew more about the failed assassination than she should. The amount was substantial. $50,000 to anyone who could confirm her death. Another $50,000 to whoever actually did the killing. For that kind of money, every desperate criminal in the city would be watching for her. You can stay in one of my properties, Nico offered during their fourth breakfast together. The penthouse dining room was flooded with morning light, the city spread out below them like a glittering promise. I have apartments throughout the city, buildings where my people can ensure your safety. You'd be protected and free to continue your business from a secure location. You mean I'd be hidden away like something you're keeping? His jaw tightened. I mean you'd be alive? For how long? Kira set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. A month? A year? Forever? I'm supposed to just disappear into your world and never come out? The threats won't last forever. Once we've eliminated everyone involved in the conspiracy, once it's clear that moving against me means death, the attention on you will fade. And until then, you have choices. His voice was patient, but she could hear the frustration beneath it. You can accept my protection and maintain some semblance of your normal life. You can try to handle this alone and probably end up dead within a week. Or you can run, leave the city, leave everything you've built, and hope they don't track you down. None of those options appealed to her. The first felt like surrender. The second was suicide. The third was abandonment of everything she'd worked for. The frustration in his voice was real, and Kira found herself responding to it despite her better judgment. Over the past days, she'd watched Nico deal with crisis after crisis, had seen him make brutal decisions with cold efficiency and gentle ones with surprising warmth. He was a contradiction wrapped in expensive suits, a monster who remembered to ask about her coffee preferences, a killer who seemed genuinely concerned about her comfort. I can't live like that, she said. I won't. I've spent my whole life learning to protect myself. I'm not going to hide behind someone else's walls just because some criminals have decided I'm inconvenient. Then work for me. The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected and yet somehow inevitable. I have people who handle security, Nico continued. Good people. But none of them saw what you saw that night. None of them moved the way you moved. You have instincts that can't be taught, skills that can't be bought. Work for me and you'll have all the resources of my organization behind you while still doing what you clearly love. Work for a crime family. Work for a man who will never betray you. His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. Work for someone who understands loyalty, who rewards it, who would never ask you to compromise your core values. You don't know what my core values are. I know you don't kill innocents. I know you believe in protection rather than aggression. I know you walked into danger to save a stranger because your conscience wouldn't let you do otherwise. His voice softened. Work for me, Kira. Let me prove that I'm worthy of what you did for me. It was tempting. More tempting than she wanted to admit. The life he was offering wasn't so different from what she was already doing, providing security for people who needed it, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The only difference was the nature of the clients and the depth of the resources she'd have access to, and the man she'd be working for. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need. But understand that until you decide, you're still in danger, and I won't leave you unprotected regardless of your answer. Because you owe me, because I want you safe. The words carried weight that went beyond obligation, because the thought of something happening to you has become intolerable to me. There it was. The thing that had been building between them, acknowledged openly for the first time. Kira felt her heart rate increase, felt the familiar surge of attraction she'd been trying to ignore. Nico, she said carefully, we barely know each other. I know enough. The echo of her own words from their first night together made her smile despite the tension. That's a dangerous foundation for anything. Everything about my life is dangerous. His eyes never left hers. But some dangers are worth it. Kira made her decision 3 days later. She agreed to work for Nico Benedetti, but not as just another member of his security team. She would be his personal protection consultant, responsible for identifying threats before they materialized, for analyzing the security gaps that had allowed Marco's conspiracy to develop undetected. She would report directly to him, would have access to intelligence that even his most trusted advisors weren't privy to, would essentially become his shadow. It was an unprecedented position for an outsider, especially a woman who wasn't Italian. The old guard of the Benedetti organization grumbled and gossiped, questioning their boss's judgment, wondering what spell this black woman had cast to earn such trust. Kira ignored them all. She threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd brought to every challenge in her life. She analyzed security protocols and found them wanting. She conducted vulnerability assessments that revealed gaps so significant she wondered how the family had survived this long. She implemented changes that ruffled feathers and questioned traditions, and generally made herself unpopular with everyone except the man who had hired her. The old guard was the worst. Men who had been protecting the Benedetti family for decades, who had earned their positions through years of loyalty and bloodshed, did not appreciate being told that their methods were outdated. They resented the young black woman who walked through their world as if she belonged there, who had the audacity to criticize systems they had built and maintained. Kira didn't care about their resentment. She cared about results. She reorganized the security rotation, eliminating patterns that a determined adversary could exploit. She upgraded communication systems, replacing outdated equipment with encrypted devices that couldn't be intercepted. She established new vetting protocols for anyone who would be trusted with access to Nico or his inner circle, psychological assessments and background checks that would have caught Marco's betrayal before it could mature. She trained the security teams in techniques she'd learned in the military, urban combat tactics and threat assessment methodologies that transformed competent bodyguards into something approaching elite operators. Some of them resented her for it. Others recognized that she was making them better at their jobs and grudgingly accepted her expertise. Within a month, the Benedetti organization's security apparatus was unrecognizable. It was professional, layered, redundant in ways that would prevent any single point of failure from becoming catastrophic. It was, Kira acknowledged with quiet pride, exactly what she would have designed if she'd been building from scratch. And through it all, she tried not to notice how often Nico found excuses to be in her presence. He attended security briefings that could have been summarized in a memo. He took his meals in rooms where she happened to be working. He found reasons to walk the same hallways at the same times, to arrive at the same destinations by coincidental routes. At first, she told herself it was natural. He was the principal. She was his security consultant. Of course, their paths would cross frequently, but the frequency became impossible to ignore, and so did the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. It had been years since Kira had allowed herself to be interested in anyone. Her work consumed her, left no room for the kind of vulnerability that relationships required. She had occasional encounters, professional women in similar circumstances who understood that connection didn't have to mean commitment, but nothing that could be called dating, nothing that could be called romance. Nico Benedetti was making her reconsider that philosophy. "You're staring," she said one evening, looking up from her laptop to find him watching her from across the room. They were in his study, surrounded by books and maps and the accumulated evidence of a lifetime spent building an empire. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "I'm appreciating. There's a difference. Most people would find it uncomfortable." "You're not most people." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." The tension that had been building between them finally broke on a Tuesday night in late November. Kira was in Nico's office reviewing intelligence reports about a rival family's movements when he entered unexpectedly and closed the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said. "That's usually not a good opening. It's about us." He moved closer, and Kira felt the air in the room change, becoming charged with something she'd been pretending not to feel. "About what's happening between us." "Nothing is happening between us." "Lies don't become you, Kira." His voice dropped lower as he stopped just inches from where she sat. His proximity was overwhelming, the scent of his cologne mixing with something warmer, more primal. "I've wanted you since the moment you pointed a gun at my enemies and told them to back off. I've thought about you every night since then. And I know, because I've watched you, that you've thought about me too. You're my employer. I'm a man who hasn't felt this way about anyone in years. Maybe ever." His hand came up to cup her face, the gesture tender despite the intensity in his eyes. His palm was warm against her cheek, his fingers gentle as they traced the line of her jaw. "Tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll accept it. But don't lie to me, Kira. We've been honest with each other from the beginning. Don't stop now." Kira could have pulled away, could have maintained the professional distance that had served her well throughout her career, could have chosen the safe path, the smart path, the path that didn't lead into the arms of one of the most dangerous men in New York. Her mother's voice echoed in her head again. "Baby, What are you doing? This man is trouble. Everything about him is trouble. But her mother had also told her once, when Kira was leaving for her first deployment, that life was too short to always play it safe. That sometimes the biggest risks led to the biggest rewards. That love, real love, rarely showed up in convenient packages. Instead, she kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative, wasn't anything like the careful, controlled interactions they'd had up to that point. It was fire and need and the release of weeks of denied attraction, a collision of two people who had been circling each other like binary stars, gravity pulling them inexorably together. When Nico responded with equal intensity, pulling her from her chair and into his arms, Kira felt something she thought she'd lost a long time ago. She felt like she'd finally found where she belonged. His hands were everywhere, mapping the curves of her body through her clothes, with a desperate urgency that matched her own. His mouth found her neck, her jaw, the hollow of her throat, leaving trails of heat wherever his lips touched. She buried her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, wanting more, needing more. They didn't make it to the bedroom that first night. The desk served their purposes well enough, files and reports scattered across the floor as Nico lifted her onto its surface and stepped between her thighs. Later, when the immediate urgency had passed, they moved to the couch by the fire, slower this time, more deliberate, learning each other's bodies with the attention to detail that characterized everything both of them did. Nico was surprisingly tender. Despite the power he wielded, despite the violence his world required, his hands on her skin were gentle. He whispered to her in Italian, words she didn't understand but felt in the reverence of his touch. He seemed almost overwhelmed by her, by the reality of finally having what he'd wanted. Kira surprised herself by letting go of control. In her professional life, in her military service, in every aspect of her existence, she maintained iron discipline. But with Nico, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to need, to want without reservation. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Afterwards, wrapped in a blanket before the dying fire, her head on his chest, Kira acknowledged what she'd been trying to deny. "This is complicated," she said. "Everything about my life is complicated." He stroked her hair, the gesture natural and soothing. "But this doesn't have to be. I want you, Kira. Not just tonight. Not just until the danger passes. I want you in my life, beside me, for as long as you're willing to stay. I'm not a woman who fits into traditional roles. I won't be a Mafia wife who stays home and raises children while her husband runs an empire. That's not who I am. I don't want you to be anyone other than who you are." His voice was firm. "I fell in love with a woman who pointed a gun at danger without hesitation. I fell in love with a soldier and a warrior and the most competent person I've ever met. Why would I want to change any of that?" The word love hung in the air between them, acknowledged for the first time. "Is that what this is?" Kira asked quietly. "Love? It is for me." Nico tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I don't know what it is for you. I'm not going to assume or demand anything. But I want you to know where I stand." Kira thought about her life before that November night, the carefully constructed independence, the professional relationships that never became personal, the walls she'd built around her heart after watching her father's betrayal destroy her family. She'd been safe behind those walls, protected, and absolutely, completely alone. "It's love for me too," she admitted, "which terrifies me, because the last time I loved someone this much, they broke my heart. I'm not your father. I'm not going to betray you. Whatever happens, whatever comes, you will always be able to trust me. That's a promise I make on my life." And somehow, against all reason and logic, Kira believed him. The relationship that developed over the following weeks defied everything Kira thought she knew about herself. She'd always been independent, guarded, unwilling to rely on anyone but herself. But with Nico, she found a partnership she hadn't known she was missing. He didn't try to soften her edges or make her more palatable for polite society. He appreciated her competence, valued her opinions, and treated her as an equal in ways that men of his power and position rarely did. When she disagreed with him, he listened. When she pushed back, he considered her arguments. When she was right and he was wrong, he admitted it with a grace that surprised her. "You're not what I expected," she told him one night, lying in his arms in the penthouse bedroom that had become theirs. "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, more controlling, less willing to share power." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back. "I've spent my whole life building an empire based on fear and force, but that's not what I want anymore. It's not what I want with you. What do you want?" A partner. Someone who sees me for what I am and chooses to stay anyway. Someone strong enough to stand beside me instead of behind me. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I want you, Kira. All of you. Whatever that means. The threats against her life gradually diminished as word spread through the criminal underworld that Kira Ashford was under the protection of Nico Benedetti. More than that, she was his. The man who controlled half of New York's underground economy had claimed her as his own, and anyone who touched her would face consequences that made death look merciful. It should have felt oppressive, should have triggered every independent instinct Kira possessed. Instead, it felt like coming home. She continued her security work, implementing changes that transformed the Benedetti organization from within. She recruited new personnel, trained existing staff, and built systems that would prevent another betrayal like Marco's from ever getting close to succeeding. Her reputation grew, spreading beyond the organization to other families who began to wonder if they could hire the woman who had revolutionized Benedetti security. The answer was always no. Kira was loyal to one man and one man only. 6 months after that first night at the Obsidian, Nico asked her to marry him. They were in Sicily, visiting the village where his family had originated. He'd taken her there to meet his grandmother, a tiny woman with eyes like steel who had looked Kira up and down for a full minute before declaring her acceptable. The proposal came at sunset on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, with the village lights beginning to twinkle behind them. I know this is fast, Nico said, the ring box open in his hand. I know that a year ago you didn't even know I existed. I know that by any reasonable standard we should wait, should be careful, should think about this logically, but I've spent my whole life being careful. I'm done waiting for things I want. The ring was simple by his standards, a single diamond in an antique setting that had been in his family for generations. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was perfect. Yes, Kira said, and watched his face transform with joy. They married in the spring, in a ceremony that brought together two worlds that should never have touched. Kira's team from her security company stood beside soldiers from the Benedetti organization. Her sister, who had flown in from Atlanta with more questions than Kira could answer, sat in the front row next to Nico's grandmother. It was unconventional and complicated, and exactly what both of them wanted. That night, in the suite Nico had booked for their honeymoon, he held her close and whispered promises into her skin. I will never let anything hurt you. I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I will be the man you deserve, even when it's hard, even when it costs me everything. And I will protect you, Kira whispered back. I will stand beside you against anyone who threatens us. I will love you even when you're difficult, even when your world tries to pull us apart. They were promises made in the dark, witnessed only by each other, but they were the truest things either of them had ever said. 1 year later, Kira stood at the window of their penthouse, watching the sun rise over Central Park. Behind her, she could hear Nico in the kitchen, making the espresso that had become their morning ritual. In the nursery down the hall, their daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the dangerous legacy she'd been born into. Kira thought about the night that had started everything, the restaurant and the warning and the split-second decision that had changed the course of her life. She thought about the woman she'd been then, competent and capable but fundamentally alone, convinced that independence was the same thing as strength. She knew better now. True strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about choosing who to stand with, about building something with someone you trusted absolutely, about letting yourself be vulnerable enough to love and be loved in return. She had saved Nico Benedetti's life on a cold November night. In return, he had refused to let her go. And in that refusal, she had found everything she never knew she was looking for. Some stories end with escapes and narrow misses, and the hero walking away into the sunset alone. This one ended with a partnership, a marriage, a family, and a love that had been forged in danger and tempered by trust. Kira watched the sun paint the city gold and felt her husband's arms wrap around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. "The night we met. The decisions that brought us here. Any regrets?" She turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had become her whole world. Not a single one. And as his lips met hers in the golden morning light, Kira knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. Some women are saved by the men they love. Kira Ashford saved her man first, and he spent the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it. If dangerous love stories hook you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more tales of passion and power. Drop a comment telling me the moment you knew Kira and Nico were meant to be, and I'll see you in the next story where love meets danger.